Hey everyone, Warrax here. So, we're going to take a look at some Season 4 dungeon content here today, and specifically we're going to be talking about Transcendence. Now, Transcendence is an ability that I think is utilized really well by good, experienced monk players, and by those that don't utilize it well, I think there's different ways that you can do it. This video has kind of been inspired by the fact that I've played a lot of, obviously, my own monk, and I'll admit, I'm not even the best at remembering all the Transcendent spots all the time. But I've also been plugging a lot on like my druid and my hunter and my evoker, and I had certain times where I was like, hey, you can Transcendence this, and they'd be like, oh, I don't even have that on my bars, even though they had it talented, because you need Transcendence to get Ring of Peace, which is silly, but is what it is. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through 4 of the 8 Dragonflight dungeons, and then I'm going to do a part 2 coming out in another day or two after this one releases, that goes over the other 4 Dragonflight dungeons. So in today's video, we're going to touch on Ruby Life Pools, Neltharus, the Nokhud Offensive, and Halls of Infusion. So, and then we'll touch on Azure Vault, Agathar Academy, Brackenhide Hollow, and then Uldaman Legacy of Teera we'll do in the next video. So basically what we're going to do is now before we get into this, I'm doing these in normal difficulty because it just makes it easy for me to solo all of this stuff. But what we're going to do basically is I'm going to go through and talk about the key points where Transcendence Tech can actually be very useful to either help you maintain DPS uptime, or allow you to cheese mechanics, or allow you to just better set yourself up for success in general. So that's what we're going to be focusing on here. Now, Ruby Life Pools, there's really only one place that it's really good at, and then there's another one that it entirely depends on the strategy that you use. So now, remember, these are normal dungeons, so all the mythic mechanics won't show, but I'll explain the ones that are there when we actually go through and it involves anything involving mythic mechanics. So what I'm going to do is the first one that is up is going to be on Melodrusa Chillworn. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clear this out real quick until we get to that boss, and we'll cut and edit and go from there. We'll do that with all of these bosses. So we'll see you there. Alright, so welcome to Melodrusa Chillworn. So this boss, if you remember from Season 1 of Dragonflight, had a couple of different mechanics to it, and a couple of like short little phases. So in this particular fight, there is one area where it's really good to do Transcendence Tech, and that's on a certain mechanic. And this is useful on, definitely on Windwalker and Mistweaver. Brewmaster, it'll kind of depend. And that is the Chillworn, or the Chillworn ability. So I'm just going to pull the boss here and show you. Now, it's going to be a little bit weird because I'm also going to get, like, the first thing. So, you get the Hail Bomb thing, obviously, which is going to be Space Denial because it comes up all the time. But this Chill Storm right here is going to be the thing. So, you're going to plan a Transcendence while you're fighting the boss. And as you can see, you get the mechanic, and in game, you're going to want to run away because then you get suctioned in. You can Transcendence that to get back over to where the boss is at quickly and save you a couple of GCDs in uptime rather than having to run back or flying serpent kick or whatever the case may be. That's really the only mechanic on this fight that it's useful on. You can't do it on every one, so you can see it comes up every now and then. Transcendence is on a 30-second cooldown with transfer. So you won't be able to do it on every single one, so you will need to have things like Tiger's Lust, I would say, have ready. So that way when you go to do the second one, or you get the second one, you have a speed buff to counter the suction. But at least for the first and the third one, you're going to be able to Transcendence that. So it's wherever you're fighting the boss at, generally speaking, you're going to pull the boss away, or you're going to take the Chillworn away. Now, if you get the mechanic, obviously you're going to want to run out and set it up and get out there and then Transcendence back in. But if you have a teammate that gets it, you can still use it to avoid the suction. So if you get pulled out of range for whatever reason, you can Transcendence back onto the boss to avoid losing GCDs in order to get it. So that's really the best Transcendence tech there. It does cause you to obviously have to set up the Transcendences on every other one. And especially as you get into tyrannical keys where this boss lasts forever. Every other one is going to be really good to have Transcendence tech on. But I think the loss of the GCD to set up Transcendence is going to more than make up for the fact that the GCDs that you gain by keeping your DPS uptime high is going to be very valuable. So that's the Transcendence tech on Melodrusid Chillworn. The rest of this dungeon, there's not really great Transcendence tech. So this is really the only one. Kahjia Blazewings, with the way the fight works out, is that it does a lot of area denial. So setting up a good Transcendence is actually really difficult because you're typically pulling the boss all the way around the ring. And then with Karaka and Aircart Stormvane, it's going to entirely depend on your strategy. Now, there are some strategies. Let me just see if I can pull the map real quick. So there's some strategies that will pull this a little bit here, that will use like these pillars, and then there's potential for some Transcendence tech out there. But this fight, with all of its space denial, is going to be a little bit difficult to always get one off, a good one off to maintain your uptime. You can always set a Transcendence for safety, like if you know you're going to get caught in something, you can always set one up. Just make sure you stay in range of it. But Flying Serpent Kick or Tiger's Lust or Roll should be more than enough in general cases to get you away from any danger on this particular fight. So in terms of the Transcendence tech in Ruby life pools, Chillworn is going to have the best one, and it's strictly on the Chillstorm debuff. So that's really the best Transcendence tech that you have here. So what we're going to do is it's pretty much it for Ruby life pools. So I'm going to move on to Neltharus. There's a couple of places that you can do in Neltharus, so we're going to go talk about those, in particular on 3 bosses that I think it's potentially very useful on. And really there's Transcendence tech, I think, on every boss. That some of it's going to be a little more universally useful, and some is very niche, but we're going to talk about it anyway. So I will see you guys when I get into Neltharus. So hang out with me for a little bit, and we will be right back. Alright friends, and welcome to Magmatusk. So this boss is, if you again recall from Season 1, the typical strat that you saw in your standard key. Obviously this is not talking about like the highest of keys, but kind of what you saw in like your 15 to probably 22 range, is that your tank would either tank it here where the boss is at, with their back to that wall, or they tank it on this side over here. Now, the tech that you want to do potentially, really for probably both specs, is going to be to pre-place a Transcendence over here. And there's a reason for this. So in coordinated groups, typically what happens is that you actually just have everyone stand against this wall, and then your tank tanks with the boss facing this way. So that when the charge happens, you limit the amount of area denial that happens. Because remember, the charge in Mythic actually will leave a flame path behind Magmatusk. In normal, it won't do that, and you'll see that, but in Mythic it does. So your tank would tank it here, all your DPS would stand here. But what's inevitably going to happen in your pugs is your mage, your warlock, your hunter, your boomy, your Ellie shamans, your ranged, and even your healer, if it's not a holy paladin or Mistweaver monk, they're going to be standing out here. So inevitably, when you get the charge, it's going to charge your ass across the way. So here's the Transcendence tech that you can use. So if you're in that type of situation, so I'm going to pull as if your range are standing out here, so that we can see the charge. It comes up in 8 seconds here. And as you can see right now, I'm out of range of my Transcendence, so I'm going to stand where I'm just in range of it. And here's the blazing charge. So you kind of move, and then you can Transcendence over and get your DPS uptime back on the boss. That's the tech. That's all it is. Again, you can't do it for every blazing charge, because blazing charge is every 15 seconds once the first one goes off. So you will have the situation where you'd only be able to use it on every other one. And some of it's just you're going to have to pre-place it every single time. So it's not going to be universally good to use like on every charge. But if you know that like you're going to be charging back and forth, you can, like, once you like have this, you can charge back over, or you can come back over here. Your Transcendence basically swaps places with you. So you can do this where, like, for example, the next charge comes up, it goes back across the room, boom, you charge over, and you're right back on the boss. And then there's your... So you can kind of cheese it a little bit with that, without having to replace Transcendence all the time. It's really good on the first one, and situationally useful after that, because it's going to entirely depend on where the hell Magmatusk charges, and where your group is standing. Again, in good coordinated groups, you're all going to be kind of stacked up for when Blazing Charge goes off, and it limits the amount of space you deny yourself in your party. But in pugs, I just can't promise that that's going to be the case. All right, so now we're going to work our way over to Chargath, who is getting reworked in season 4. And right off the top of my head, I don't remember all the changes. I did do a dungeon video that talks about the changes in that, and I think it's chaptered out so that you can go find Chargath's changes. So if you want to talk about that, we definitely can. But I'm just going to go ahead and clear trash all the way to Chargath, and then we'll talk about the very situationally useful Transcendence Tech that you have there. Oh, real quick, let's talk about Neltharus chains for a second. So one of the big things about Neltharus is that in Season 1, basically, this dungeon was a way to clear out a bunch of trash. Now, they've made the changes to these chains so that when you use them, they don't do any damage, they only stun. And then you get a 3-minute debuff that makes it so that you can't use chains again. So what the common tech was is that you would basically rotate who would do chains so that you could maximize damage, and it would basically kill trash. The other change that they've made is that once you use them once, you can't use them again. So there's one that you encounter twice that would make it kind of tough to do it again, and you can see there's chains back here as well. So I don't know how useful chains are going to be come Season 4. I imagine it won't be nearly as useful, which I'm okay with. Dungeons that play themselves are traditionally very bad. So you think about Necrotic Wake, for example, in Shadowlands, like universally kind of hated dungeon because it was all about using your weapons. It wasn't actually about playing the dungeon. It was how big could you pull, use your weapons to do the majority of your damage, and then move on with your life. And it would even kill bosses for you even faster and things like that. So it was just a situation where things like that, I hate that they do that. So these changes to the chains to where they're much less impactful on this dungeon, I think is really good. All right, now let's talk about Chargath. Now, the one main mechanic with Chargath that is still going to be useful to have Transcendence Tech on is going to be the chains. So some of this is going to depend a little bit on strat and coordinated groups. Some of it's going to depend on how well your pugs do. But the main tech, and this is, again, fairly niche, but can be very useful, is that when chains go out... So let me get a little damage going here. You just avoid the lava start. Now, the Dragon Strike does knock your tank back. I would say Transcendence as a Brewmaster here, probably fine. But I don't think it's going to be all that useful. So this Grounding Spear is the one. So basically what most people do is they run out here, and then you have to break it on the boss when they do Fiery Focus. Now you can see right there, I lost a lot of DPS uptime. And depending on the group, it's going to be a situation where you're going to be running around, a lot of damage is going to go out, things like that. And if you're slow to break your chain, you're also going to just die. You have to defensive this on high tyrannical keys, whether it's Karma or Dampen Harm or things like that. So it's going to be one of those situations where, like, let me pull it over here. I'm going to set a Transcendence here. And then what you typically do is you'll spread out so that you don't overlap circles. And then you can immediately come back, Transcendence back, and boom, break your chain. So this does require you to basically let the group know that you're going to be breaking first because you have Transcendence Tech. Nice. We'll take the appearance. So it does require that you actually go through and like communicate with your group, even in pugs, like, hey, I'm going to Transcendence the first chain so that it breaks pretty immediately. FYI. because every time you break a chain, it pulses out damage to the rest of your group. And if you break all three in quick succession, you wipe your group. So you want to make sure that you're communicating that so that your healer can be prepared and the rest of your DPS can be prepared, because it's the only one that doesn't get it is the tank. Now, the other thing with tanking and what you can do as a tank on that fight is you can also set Transcendence so that your DPS can be spread out and then you go from there. But that's a much more niche strategy that I don't think is going to net a ton of benefit in the long term. As a tank, as a Brewmaster, you're just going to want to be able to sit there and just move the boss effectively and be mindful of breaking chains too quickly. But for Woodwalker and Mistweaver, I think that Transcendence chain deck to break your chain quickly is going to be very useful, specifically for Mistweaver, so that you can focus on not healing yourself and focus on getting out your Renewing Mist, Vivify Cleave, Sheelan's Gift, and even get that Ancient Teachings healing going off again. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to allow for some effective uptime on certain bosses. Alright, now we're going to move over to Forgemaster Gorek, which doesn't have any useful tech for Windwalker or Mistweaver, but does have one that is potentially very good for Brewmaster. So we're going to talk about that when we get there. Again, probably going to be a little bit niche, but I think the potential effectiveness of this is going to largely vary, but it's still useful to know because it is another way for you to deal with a specific mechanic. And that's really what this is focused on. Can you make mechanics easier for yourself? How do you maximize your DPS uptime? Those are the things that I'm focused on in this particular video. So I'm going to go ahead and get to Forgemaster Gorek, and I will see you when I get there. All right, and welcome to Forgemaster Gorek. Now, this is going to be for Brewmaster only. And this, again, is not going to be universally the way you may want to do this mechanic, but at least it gives you another out to handle a mechanic called Heavy Hitters. Now, in Mythic version of this, basically what will happen is Forgemaster Gorek will do a knock up and then a knock back, and then he's going to do a jump to the location that you land at. Jump on you, leave a flame patch in. Now, as you get into higher and higher tyrannical keys, that mechanic can and will one-shot tanks. It does like 2 million damage in higher keys. At least it was back in Season 1. It was doing like 1 million damage, and we did have nearly that HP. I definitely was one-shot on my Druid more than I care to admit. Now for Monk, there's a few different ways you can handle it. Obviously, you have Roll, you have Tiger's Lust, but you can also use Transcendence here. It doesn't necessarily lose you this more time to do this, but I just want to show it off real quick just so that you know what to do with it. So typically what would happen is you would start over here by this table, and then you're going to go in and fight Gorek up on the platform here. So we're looking for Heated Swings, so it's about in 15 seconds. Alright. Now Might of the Forge would just do pulsing AoE damage, so you can do things to help with this as a tank. This mechanic, no reason to Transcendence it because it, as you can see, just spreads out like that. So you just want to make sure you avoid swirlies. Now Heated Swings is where we're at. So I'm going to place my Transcendence. And as you can see, boom, he's going to jump. I can Transcendence back, avoid it. And you don't really lose any DPS uptime as a result. Now again, there's going to be patches that are left. So you're going to want to replace your Transcendence every time. Now again, you can't do it for every single one because of the cooldown on transfer. But you can see here we're getting Blazing Ages coming out, and then Heated Swings is going to come out again. As you can see, Transcendence won't be back up. So again, this is going to be like in every other mechanic, or every other one mechanic. So the second one, easier just to roll, and then you're back in going. So that's the Transcendence Tech there. Again, you can just roll every single one, and you're probably going to be okay. And worst case scenario, you can Tiger's Lust it, and you're going to be fine as well. But Transcendence just gives you a third way to get on the out. So if you screw up your roll charges, or you accidentally Tiger's Lust someone, you're not just running out and hoping you move fast enough with movement speed. You have a third way to do it. It makes that fight very free as a Brewmaster Monk. It's one of the best boss fights for Brewmaster in that dungeon because the damage that Gorek does. Yeah, there's some fire damage that's there, but for the most part, it's all physical. So Brewmaster deals with it just fine, and because you have 3 ways to potentially escape the heavy swings, you basically, the mechanic is a non-mechanic. It just takes a little bit of prep and planning, and a little bit of paying attention to your movement economy. So Very, very easy fight for Brewmaster Monks to do. So that's the Transcendence Tech there. Again, not going to be something you do every single time. You may not even use it once in a single boss fight. But if you fuck up your roll charges, or you fuck up a Tiger's Lust or something like that, and you're like, shit, how am I going to deal with this mechanic? You actually have a third way to be able to do it in that. Which is much different than, I know, like, Bear basically can wild charge and pray if they move fast enough. Warriors I know can like heroic leap it, paladins steed it, Death Knights deaths advance it and pray, really. And then like Vengeance, they don't give a shit. They just Infernal Strike back out. So like every tank has a way to be able to deal with it. I would argue that Death Knight and Druid are actually probably the worst because you're using Stampeding Roar as well, which is a 1 minute cooldown, so you can only use that once, and then you're kind of praying that your wild charge takes care of you. But you have to wait until you land before you wild charge back. Same with Warrior. So it's a really interesting mechanic, and for Monk, you can basically just ignore it with good resource movement. Now, we're going to get into some trash here. We're not going to skip ahead to Warlord Sargha just yet. Because the Apex Blazewing is going to be another mob that actually Transcendence can be useful on. So there's really a couple of different ways that this gets done. So there are some groups that will come up and use these chains if they didn't use it on the pack that starts out here earlier. Now again, these chains I think can only be used once per dungeon. So if that's the case, then you won't be able to use the chains. If that's the case, or if you're not using the chains, then there were two places basically that this mob got tanked. Right here, or your tank would run through and put their back over here. Now, most pug tanks are going to tank it right out here because it's just where you go. But in coordinated groups, and what people discovered over time is that if you tank it here with your back to this and then your party sits back here, this Apex Blazewing does a ability that does a knockback. And you can Transcendence it to kind of maintain your uptime. So I'm going to pull the mobs. I'm going to stand right here. I'm going to place my Transcendence, and I'm going to let this Blazewing do its thing. So here's the Incandescent Tempest. As you can see, it knocks you back, and it knocks you back pretty far. So you can Transcendence it to get back on this Blazewing. Typically, in Mythic Plus situations, that Blazewing is going to be your priority because of the knockback. So that's just kind of a thing that you can do with that mob, and there's another one up at the top of this ramp that is also going to be available to you. But like I said, you may be in a situation where the tank runs through, pulls them here, and then you're going to be required to pull over here so that you can stand over there, and that minimizes the effects of the knockback, in which case your Transcendence is not going to be all that useful. Now, you got a second Apex Blazewing up here, so I'm just going to roll through. Now, this one you can't tank off to the side because you don't want these Lavamancers or these Wardens unless you need the trash count. So a lot of what happens is the tank will come through and pull it here, which means you're standing usually like over on that side. And so again, you can use your Transcendence on this Incandescent Tempest. You got to knock away, Transcendence back, you're good to go. You still have one more. You can wait till 3, but I would honestly, once you get out of range, go ahead and use it, because then at that point you're going to be maintaining your uptime and go from there. So you can probably stay within range on the first knockback. On the second knockback, you're probably going to want to go ahead and Transcendence, and then the third knockback you should be able to stay in range for DPS on both Windwalker and Mistweaver. Alright. Now, Warlord Sargha does have some Transcendence ability here as well. So, again, talking what became sort of known as the typical strats in most keys, was that you would tank the boss basically where he's standing. And some tanks would even pull and go like as far back as over here, because you want to give yourself room. Now, they summon, during the fight, Warlord Sargha will summon one Blaze Elemental, or Fire Elemental, that will randomly fixate a player. Here it's going to fixate me every time because I'm the only one here. But it'll randomly fixate a player, so you want to give your team room to do it. Because usually what would happen is, like, if it was on like a melee, they'd just all swap and kill it real quick. If it's on a range, like a hunter, for example, would trap it. Or you'd banish it if it was a warlock or something like that. But for the most part, you're going to have all this room out here. Now, the Transcendence Tech for this boss fight is not actually anything to do with the Blaze Elemental, because that's whatever. But if you remember, there's going to be piles of gold that get thrown out where you actually have to get these items. And even though they can be used on the move, there is some potential to use Transcendence to be able to quickly get back onto the boss, get that last second of DPS, and go. Because what happens in Mythic Plus situations is that there'll be like 6 or 7 gold piles that are thrown out. You can have up as many as 10 or 11 out at a time. And so what you do is you gather your first one. The first shield comes up, you burst the shield, get your damage, and then once the damage amp phase ends, you go back out and you go get it again. And that's where your Transcendence Tech is going to be most useful. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this boss and just kind of show you off a little bit. So Dragon's Kiln, this is just a frontal that the tank avoids. Very easy. Molten Gold, this is when your Transcendence can be potentially useful. This is just a debuff here. It does a little bit of damage. Let me see. Yeah, Burning Ember, this is the Flame Elemental, so we're just going to kill him real quick. And as you can see, it's fixating me because the only one. Alright, but the Magma Shield is coming out now. In Mythic Plus, by this time, you can see these right here are coming out. So you're going to get your Magical Implements. Now, these can be used on the fly. And you're going to want to get a couple of them. So you can see here, they're all spread out in the far reaches of hell over here. And you have to do 3 of them, or it's 2 of them, I guess, in normal, but it's 3 of them in Mythic Plus. So the Transcendence Tech that you can do here, and it's going to be a little bit harder because the boss is going to follow me around. But say you get this phase out here, and then you can actually come out here and say, all right, cool, I need to come get my thing. Obviously, I have used my roll charges. So you come out here like as a monk, or as a Windwalker, and come get this, and then say the boss is still over here. You just Transcendence back, and you're right back on the boss with your next implement, and your ability to get back up onto the boss. So that's really the Transcendence Tech there. Now, during the initial shield phase, I'm actually going to recommend that you don't Transcendence back to the boss once you get your implement. Because what happens in Mythic Plus is that there are massive flame swirlies that will go around, and they will do a lot of damage to you. So Transcendencing there is like super tricky to do. So you really want to use it to go get your second one, or you do it in between. If you feel confident in your ability to get it in between the phases. Again, it's niche. You may not use it all the time. It'll depend a little bit on strategies and stuff like that. But just a way to be able to get that extra 2 to 3 GCDs of uptime on the boss, make your damage out a little bit better. Every boss in Neltharus, plus a couple of trash mobs, do have some good ways to be able to utilize Transcendence. So Neltharus, great Transcendence dungeon. I strongly recommend that you keep in mind all these techs that you can use. Alright, now we're going to move on to Nokhud Offensive, and in Nokhud Offensive, there's really only 2 bosses that Transcendence is useful on. But unfortunately it requires me to clear the whole dungeon because we've got to get to Balakhar Khan, who is one, and then Granyth has the other one. Unfortunately, Primal Tempest and Teera and Maruuk don't really have so. Teera and Maruuk you'd think would have one, but the timing doesn't work out on it because of the way that the fear and stuff like that works. Where the fear and her leap are basically on the same timer, so that every other leap there's a fear, and you can't Transcendence the fear because you're going to want to go over to Teera anyways, who's going to be your main target on that, because of her leaping around and doing all the things. So we're going to head on over, and I'll get you... we'll cut and edit this, and then I'll be back when I'm in front of Granyth. Again, a tech that's going to be somewhat niche, but if you're forced to have to do a specific mechanic of this boss fight, it's going to be very useful to know this tech. Folks, and welcome to Granyth. So this is going to be mostly for Windwalker or Mystery Room monks, and it's only if you end up having to do one specific mechanic. So for those of you that don't remember or never did this boss in Mythic Plus type situations, basically what would happen is that these 3 Dragon Killer Lances that are around this boss arena, you basically have to use them to stop a cast from Granyth called Eruption. And it does a chunk of damage to him, stuns him, make sure that you get some free damage off without basically getting killed. Now the thing is that with this mechanic, typically you would have a range to it. Ideally a BM Hunter would do it because you don't lose any DPS while going to do this mechanic. Now, not always the case. Sometimes groups would say, hey, healer, you've got to take care of it, which means if you're a Mistweaver monk, you're running around. Now, in Mythic, there's an ad that gets called in, so things like Ring of Peace are going to be very useful. Your stuns are going to be useful, so this dungeon, I don't think it's a good, for Brewmaster you get both, but for Windwalker you kind of pick one or the other. I don't think this is a great detox dungeon for Windwalker, so you'd probably want to grab Paralysis because it's useful on a couple of ads throughout the dungeon, but I'll do guide videos on all of that later. But basically, if you're a Windwalker or a Mistweaver that has to end up doing the Dragon Killer Lance mechanic, you have Transcendence Tech that you can use to help you out with this. Now, which one of these comes first, I think ends up being random. So you can't pre-Transcendence one of the lances. But what you can do is you can Transcendence the boss. So we're going to see which one of these ends up being... Okay, so Tectonic Stomp just does a stun if you hit it, so you want to move out of that. Alright, which one of these is going to be first? Alright, so it's the one behind me. So you can see he's casting Eruption. So I'm running out here to do the Lance. And what you can do, Transcendence back in, and you're right back on the boss right as he does that. So that's basically the tech. Again, you won't be able to do this on every single one. It'll have to be every other one that you do it on. But it is useful tech so that when you fire the Lance, you can Transcendence back in and you're getting the absolute maximum uptime on the damage amp phases that happen during this boss fight. Excuse me. My acid reflexes give me some issues tonight, so apologies for that. So that's really it. Like I said, you can Transcendence every other one. You always want to put your Transcendence on the boss and then run out to any Dragon Killer Lance that you have to do. So again, if you're a Windwalker or Mistweaver doing it, you're talking Roll, you're talking Flying Serpent Kick for Windwalker, and Tiger's Lust to get out there, and then you just Transcendence back so that you can maximize the uptime that you're getting damage-wise, just to give you that extra GCD or 2 GCDs total, depending on how far you run, to get everything else done. So that's really the first best use of Transcendence. The second one is not until Balakhar Khan. Raging Tempest doesn't really have anything, because Raging Tempest is much more about maintaining your orb uptime and avoiding denial of space as much as humanly possible. And so there's not really any good Transcendence techs here that we can use other than maybe switching to the other side of the boss if there's like an orb that's in danger of going to the boss, because in normal what happens is that he will spawn a bunch of these orbs out. In normal and in heroic I think they don't move at all, but in Mythic Plus they will get slowly sucked into the boss. It's very similar to the way that the Farak orbs work in Emir Drasil, where in those intermission phases you have to absorb all the orbs in normal and heroic. In Mythic there's a shadow and a flame one that you have to get. But in Mythic Plus for this boss you gotta get them before they reach the boss, because you get I believe it's a 5% damage and haste buff, or damage and healing buffed rather, for every orb that you have. But if you don't get them before they get to the boss gets that, and it's permanent damage on the boss, so it can very quickly spiral out of control. So as far as Transcendence techs go, there's not a lot that's going on here that we can really utilize. So unfortunately I just got to clear this so that I can get to Balakhar Khan. That's the only reason I'm doing this. So I'm basically just gonna do this real quick, and then I will be back when I'm in front of Balakhar Khan. Actually, I'll probably talk about Teera and Maruuk a little bit, but we'll figure it all out. Oh, sorry to cut in here. I know I said in front of Balakhar Khan, but there's actually one small potential Transcendence tech that's here. in the trash before Teera and Maruuk. So we're going to kill this last hill here. So there's what's called the Soul Harvester. I think it's the Soul Harvester or the Corruptor, one of the two that does it. Basically, there's a mechanic that's called, that's going to basically split your soul. So there's potential for this to be useful, as you can see right here. It goes out right here. So you can come get your soul and then Transcendence back in to get back on the mobs a little bit faster. Obviously, they kind of traveled with me because I'm tanking and I'm the only one here. But that is potential Transcendence tech inside of this area here. And it's only on this pillar and that pillar over there, because that's where the only ones where the soul snatchers are at. So, just real quick there, just small potential Transcendence tech. And then what you're likely going to see in Mythic Plus here is that once you kill off these 4 hills and you have like this RP going, a lot of groups will either pull like this pack or they'll pull like these two, because you're pulling a lot of the trash here so that you get to 100%. And I'll do route videos and stuff like that later, but just to keep yourself busy. Alright, so Teera and Maruuk, they don't really have any Transcendence tech. So the big thing that I'm looking at here, let me grab them and do abilities. So like you have this Frightful Roar, which basically does, it's like a big old fear. Now the Frightful Roar is on, I believe, a 30-second cooldown. It happens every 30 seconds. And then you get this Spirit Leap, which goes every 15 seconds. So on the first Frightful Leap, Teera is also going to jump. Now there's a swirly on the ground that tells you when that is. So because of that, you're mostly going to follow where Teera is jumping to. So there's not really a way to Transcendence back on top of Maruuk, because you're not going to want to do that. If they get split apart for too long, they get like a massive damage reduction. So your tank's always going to follow Teera around and just force Maruuk to come with him all the time. Or her. Come with him or her, whoever your tank is. And because the leap is every 15 seconds and then the fear is every 30 seconds, you don't really get the ability to do Transcendence tech here. Even though on the initially you think, oh, have to run out of a giant purple circle, I can Transcendence back in right afterwards. No, it's because you're going to be following Teera around anyways, so it doesn't really matter. Anyways, I'm going to kill this boss so that I can open up Balakhar Khan, and we'll talk about Balakhar Khan and some of the cool Transcendence tech that you can do there. Now, Balakhar Khan tricks, there's not really one in, I think in phase 1 that you can use. You can kind of use one, but it takes a lot of setup, and I don't particularly like using it. But it can be situationally useful as Windwalker or as Mistweaver, and that's where both of these are going to come into play. So, real quick about Balakhar Khan, he has basically 3 phases. So phase 1, it's pretty easy. Your tank will do one of 2 things. They'll tank them facing over there, or they'll tank them facing out this way. One of the 2. And then what'll happen is that there's going to be a spear ability where basically he'll throw a spear on the ground at a targeted player and then charge wherever that player is standing. So there is some potential Transcendence tech in P1 where you Transcendence, say like you're tanking the boss here, where you place a Transcendence there, and then if you get the ability, you go running off over here, and then when he starts charging, you Transcendence back. Because if you get hit by the charge, you're dead. Even on Fortified, it will kill a DPS or a healer. So you can Transcendence back and then go from there, but you do lose a little bit of DPS uptime as a result. I mean, either way, you're going to lose a little DPS uptime. It's just, unfortunately, there's not a way around it. So I don't necessarily love that Transcendence tech, but, and there's a big but, because they got to wait until, we got to see if they actually fixed it. But what happens with this boss in P3 after you kill all these storm casters is his spear that he throws in P1 becomes empowered with lightning, and it's called Static Spear at that point. And what he'll do basically is he'll target a player, when he throws the spear, it pulls every player to wherever that's at. So people found out, I don't know if they found this out by accident or not, but it's been a long thing, where basically you'd kind of tank him generally in this vicinity. And then if you get the Static Spear, you come over here, and when he charges, he hits this rock and it gets treated like Blink does, where If a blade of grass is too tall, blink just doesn't go. It stops him at this rock, so you avoid any potential damage that you get. So what I am generally going to do is I'm going to pre-place Transcendence here. Because again, I don't necessarily care for the spear work in P1. I care more about P3 because that's the hardest part of this fight. So again, I'm going to get targeted with this because, again, I'm the only one here, so we're going to be able to get through that. So I'm going to quickly try to burn through phase 1. We'll kind of show you a little bit here. So a lot of tanks will tank it out like this. Rending Strike's just a bleed that goes on the tank. So you're just going to have to survive it. It's a bleed, so it's going to kind of screw Brewmasters over. But it is what it is. So this is the Iron Spear. So what a lot of people will do is, you can see he charges it, throws it, knocks you back, and then he does a charge in Mythic version. On normal, he doesn't do it. So this is P2. This is just going to require some kicks and interrupts on the part. You're going to have to coordinate it with your group. So what typically happens, if you have a DK, this is where you save A-Bomb Limb. Whether you're DPS or tank. But for monks, you can try to ring a piece something over, but really you're just going to have to coordinate kicks. Alright, so this is where the Storm Unleash, stage 2, I call it stage 3, comes into play. So I'm going to wait until Static Spear happens. Conductive Strike, again, just does damage. And you do take more damage from these Thunder Strikes if you get it. So here's a Static Spear. So you can see I Transcendence over. And I'm just going to stand here. Here comes the Stampede. Boom. He gets hit by that right there. And it basically just makes it so that there's no risks to anyone. So slower classes like Priest or DK and things like that aren't in danger of getting killed. So you can do that. Again, it's only useful if you're targeted by the Static Spear that you want to come over here. If you're not targeted by it, you're going to get yanked over there anyways, if that's the strat that your group is doing. So again, situationally useful, and entirely depends on if you get targeted with the mechanic or not, but that is a Transcendence Tech. If you use Rock Strat, that is very good. Now, if your group doesn't use Rock Strat, you're probably just better off placing a Transcendence coming over here and then Transcendencing out when he starts his charge. So either way, there's still some situationally useful ways to Transcendence in on that boss, but it's going to be most useful if you use Rock Strat. So that's it for Nokhud. So first and last boss are some good Transcendence Tech. Not really anything on Trash or the other two bosses, unfortunately, so it is what it is. So we're going to go to the last dungeon for this video, and that is Halls of Infusion. Right, folks, welcome to Halls of Infusion. Now, in this dungeon, there are two bosses that I think have decent Transcendence Tech on them, and that is Watcher Irideus and the Primal Tsunami. So we're going to kind of just run through there, and we're going to get to these bosses as fast as we can. Gulping Goliath and Kahjia, I don't think there's really any good Transcendence Tech because of the way those bosses function. So we're not going to be too worried about them. And as far as I remember, there's not really any Trash that has any Transcendence Tech to it. Alright, cool. Didn't know that was going to happen. So I will clear the trash. We're going to work our way over until we get to Watcher Irideus. So we'll see when we get there. All right, so welcome to Watcher Irideus. So this boss has gotten some changes going into Season 4. There's a particular mechanic where it used to put basically electrified ground patches on the ground. And basically it would just be like, the longer the fight went on, the larger it got. They made the change so that when you lay these patches on the ground, they basically grow over time. And this is where your Transcendence Tech comes into play. So I'm going to place a Transcendence over here by the stairs. Actually, no. I'm not going to do that. Can I cancel that? I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to put a Transcendence over here. Now, I don't know if I'm going to even get this mechanic or not, but we'll see. But basically, if you get targeted by... I think it's Power Overload. Either that or Static Surge. So we just move out of that. See if I get it. That's just a thing. I think it's Power Overload. Yeah. So what's do power overload is that you'd run it out here. And you can see there's a patch on the ground. And you can see it already's got the change where it grows. So you can see that's the tech. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place Transcendence here in the middle. Now, normal it goes away. In Mythic, it will not go away. Alright, so we're going to run out here. So you place your patch, and then you Transcendence back so that, you know, the boss obviously will not follow you because your tank will have it. And the tank does not get the mechanic. So that's the Transcendence Tech here, is it allows you to be able to just get back in, avoids the damage that you take from the static patch. And then, you know, we go from there. Now, I forgot how much this mechanic was dumb. In Mythic, you don't want to stand inside these circles because I think it does a stun or something like that on you. So, but that's where it's at. Power overload, you can Transcendence here, run out, drop your patch at the edge of this arena. You have basically this whole platform to you. And then you Transcendence back into the boss so you can quickly get back up there and do your DPS uptime. So, that's the tech on that. Gulping Goliath, there really isn't a good tech because of the way the boss works. You don't want to be Transcendencing out too far away from mobs or anything like that. Same with Kahjia, it's a lot like, has a lot of like line of sight type stuff. So Transcendence, not going to be universally useful because it's a little RNG on how you're going to be getting your like stones that you'll be working around to. So not really anything good on Kahjia. So really the only other one that's going to be very effective is going to be on Primal Tsunami. So I'm going to skip ahead to when I'm in front of Primal Tsunami after killing the rest of these bosses. So I'll see you there. Alright, so one quick note about Kahjia while I'm here real quick. Not super useful. But you notice there's like some of these bricks are already cracked, some of them are whole. Typically speaking, what would happen is you'd pull the boss here. So you can technically Transcendence this and go when you get our first mechanic here. So this is technically something that you can do. Again, probably only going to be useful on the first one because after that it's a little RNG. So like, see the hailstorm, do Transcendence and hide so that you don't take that damage. On Mythic, there's also a mechanic that makes it so that you can get targeted by a wind that will actually, if you target one of these, it'll do it. So you can see another one here. So again, avoid these in Mythic because again, they'll kill you, but I'm in normal, so I don't care. So that's really the only Transcendence tech you can do there, but it's probably only going to be useful for the first one because after that, it's really RNG as to where your safety ice blocks are going to be at. But you can do it for the first one. So I wanted to point it out that you could do it for the first one, and therefore it is useful to know. All right, now we're going to move on to Primal Tsunami, which requires a little bit of Transcendence setup, but we'll go from there, and I'll let you know when I am there. Or we'll be back when I am there. So welcome to Primal Tsunami. So this one, there is potential tech. Some of it is going to be RNG, though, as to how useful it is. So in the intermission phase, you're going to get knocked away basically to one of these two sides over here. Either down here or down here, potentially even down here. And basically what you're going to want to do is you can set a Transcendence basically at the corner and pray that you get there quickly. Because what happens is that there are 4 adds that channel into the Primal Tsunami, and the longer that they live, the more damage the Primal Tsunami will do in the second phase in particular. That said, when you interrupt the main cast that they do on Primal Tsunami, they have an uninterruptible Yeah, I got a little unlucky. I went to the opposite side. They have an uninterruptible cast that can absolutely truck. And of course, my Transcendence got moved. So, again, like I said, a little RNG on how useful it's going to be. Actually, I think they made that change to where it doesn't even allow you to Transcendence this anymore. Now that I think about it. So this is even less useful than I thought. Okay. Well, I'm just... You know what? We'll leave my own mistake in here for ridiculousness purposes. So anyways, that's the video there. So, yeah, you can't Transcendence that because... reasons. I forgot they changed that in... I think it was in Season 1 when that changed, or Season 2 when that changed. So really, Transcendence in this boss is only going to be good for Watcher Irideus for power overload, so be mindful of that. But that's the end of this video. That's the first 4 dungeons down. Next video that I'll be recording soon-ish, we're going to be doing Algathar Academy, Azure Vault, Uldaman, and Brackenhide Hollow. So until the next video, all, hope you all stay safe, hope you enjoy yourself, you have fun, you keep on gaming, put the hearts out, and I'll see you all in the next video.